people often think that, oh, it's a numbers game, like infertility. It's not. It's never a numbers game. In fact, when we understand the root cause of what is happening and those multiple obstacles to optimum fertility and an optimal outcome, then that's how we actually start to be able to change the situation.
Welcome to F.E.R.T.I.L.E, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. F.E.R.T.I.L.E communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning F.E.R.T.I.L.E and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to the F.E.R.T.I.L.E podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own interest to help others. And today, it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome Gabriela Rosa. Now, Gabriela is the founder and director of the Rosa Institute, an organization focused on improving clinical outcomes and advancing scientific knowledge in the reproductive medicine space to help couples overcome fertility challenges and conceive healthier babies. She's also the host of the Talk Sex podcast, and Gabriela is committed to promoting effective men's and women's health diagnosis, treatment, self-efficacy through education and long-term well-being. Welcome, Gabriela, and wonderful work that you're doing. It's amazing.
Thank you, Damien. It's lovely, to be able to be here and to talk about all of this, important work.
Yeah, it is. It's such an important work. And I think even in today's day and age as well, because there is so many people, well, I hear of so many people having trouble having babies and having such a fulfilling part of their life. And I know as a parent myself, there's nothing that would change that. I mean, love being a dad and having their children. And when I was a stepdad, I love being a stepdad as well. That connection that you have is just insane to have that. But do you want to take us back? Let's jump in the Wayback Machine. Now, you might remember this as a silver DeLorean Doc Brown invented, and when you hit 88 miles an hour, you can travel through time. You want to jump in the driver's seat, put your foot to the floor, let's hit 88 miles an hour, go back in time, because I understand there was some period in the beginning that really drove you to what you're doing now. Do you want to talk us through that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that every single aspect of life takes us to where, eventually we are at any given point. But I think I know what you're I guess referring to. And that was when I decided, okay, there's something not quite right about not getting a period, right, as a woman. And, I know that for a lot of women, it is a point of almost, major stress when something that is normal and natural isn't happening as normally or as naturally as it should. And certainly for my patients, it's something that I hear very frequently because, clearly when you're trying to help couples overcome infertility and miscarriage, especially when other treatments have failed, there is and every person around them is getting pregnant easily and not really having, any major trouble. And especially also, as we're told, I'm sure that sex education at school was very much revolving around, don't get pregnant or don't make a girl pregnant, in high school. But because that's really what we're kind of, introduced to very early on in our sexual lives. It's all about don't get pregnant or, don't make a girl pregnant for the boys. But the reality is that getting pregnant isn't always as easy as that for many people. And, when I first realized that, okay, getting pregnant is one aspect. Certainly, I didn't want to have that happen too soon. But when I was about 18, my periods all of a sudden stopped. And I had, had regular periods from, I guess, probably around the age of 11, 12. And what happened around that time was that I had just gotten off the pill. I was studying to be a naturopath, and I had gotten off the pill because I realized that actually that wasn't really the best thing for me and my body. And, I guess, like anybody, you get off the pill and you expect that your periods are going to come back normally and regularly straight away. And that didn't happen. A month went past, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5. And then I started to think, okay, this is not really what I was expecting. I was expecting that I would have my period by now after getting off the contraceptive pill. So at 6 months, I actually was working in an obstetrician gynecologist office.
Yeah.
And I worked there for many years whilst I was studying. And I asked one of the female gynecologists, I said, listen, I haven't had a period for 6 months, and I'm not really sure. I'm not pregnant. I've done multiple pregnancy tests, and I'm not sure why that is the case. Is there something that you would recommend? She a couple of things and said, oh, look, you're probably just better off, going and doing some blood tests. But she wasn't very forthcoming, and I didn't really want to kind of also cross that, professional relationship. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to make an appointment with some other doctor down the road and see what happens. And so I went to see another gynecologist in a different clinic. And, he was old school, let's put it this way,
Okay, yes.
And by old school, I mean zero bedside manner, and I thought, oh God, this is not going to go well. But I just wanted to get some answers. And so, I said to him, I said, look, I haven't had a period for 6 months. I'm not pregnant. I've done multiple pregnancy tests. And literally, it was like he shut me up by saying, and I almost didn't finish what I was going to say. And he literally said, every woman's pregnant until proven otherwise.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, yeah, but except that I'm not. So, what are we going to do about that? And he goes, well, we'll do some blood tests. Call me in a couple of days for the results. I'm like, okay, that was very dismissive at best, but fine. So, I went, did the blood tests, and called him in 2 days. 2 days later, as he had suggested. I remember it was a Thursday. You can imagine. I remember very clearly this moment, and as he answers the phone, his receptionist puts me through, and he answers the phone, and he says, "Oh yes, you have polycystic ovarian disease."
Wow.
And in that moment, it was just really like, I was really taken aback. I was like, hang on a second, am I going to die? Like, literally, that was my first question, because I was like, I knew nothing about polycystic ovarian disease, and I was thinking,
it sounds ominous.
Exactly. It sounds like you're about to die now. Like,
it's like
a moment.
Yeah, it's like it almost feels like a plague type thing when you put it
That's
that way.
Right. That's exactly right. And so I was like a bit shocked, and literally, but before I could actually verbalize what I wanted to know or anything, he literally just, the next sentence that came out of his mouth was, "You're probably never going to have children." I'm like,
oh no.
Okay, that this was how I got this diagnosis, right? And how I was delivered this news. And at the time I thought, well, that's okay, because I don't really feel like I desperately need to be a mum anyway. I really want to focus on my career. So, okay, that's not, but am I going to die was a very, very pressing question in my mind at the time.
Yeah.
And he then just kind of said, and I said, is it very serious? Like, what's the situation here? Oh, no, you just need to, I don't even remember what he said after that. Like, honestly, that part I don't actually recall. He basically just said, oh, we'll see how it goes, and, good luck. If there's anything else, just let me know. And I'm thinking, oh, I sure will not. But, that's a whole nother story. So what was interesting about that is that it brought me face to face with what I realized I never wanted my patients to experience, right? Which was feeling completely, unheard, dismissed, and just really unsure about what is the prognosis, what's going to happen from here? How can I help myself? Those are all very pressing questions at the time that I really wanted to understand the answers to.
Mm.
And I knew, as I kind of got into practice and I started to see patients, I knew from that experience what kind of clinician I wanted to be.
Mm.
And how I wanted to support my patients. It's certainly a whole lot more than just, you've got this condition and good luck, because no one really wants to be treated that way, although it's almost like the healthcare system is designed, in that way, in many ways. So it was an interesting experience, but certainly it taught me a lot about what kind of, person and clinician that I really wanted to be.
Is that from that perspective? Because, as you say, in the healthcare profession, it does seem to be that. Is it partly because people are really not sure how to do? Because we're dealing with very emotional situations when in that health profession, when you're dealing with people that might have a chronic, well, a chronic illness, one that a terminal illness even. How do you? I mean, that's really, really emotional to deal with. Is that? Do you think it's partly because that soft skill is lacking, and it's
You know, it's it's a structural issue, really, because
mm,
if you really think about it, as humans, we're designed to care, right?
mm.
Unless you're a sociopath, you're going to, because, I mean,
Yeah.
we know that
Sometimes I wish
happens.
I was, but, because I'm dealing with certain people.
Yeah, that's right. But the thing is, unless you are in a sociopath category, which
Mm,
few people are,
mm,
we tend to deal with others with empathy, with some level of empathy, with some
mm,
level of kindness. I mean, we know when we see somebody hurt or we see somebody hurting or
mm,
upset, it's a natural desire to want to understand what's happening. How can I help you?
mm,
What is it that you need? So doctors, by default,
mm.
they are caring people. It's
Yeah.
not that they're not. What happens, I think, is that, in the way that the healthcare system is structured,
Mm,
it is a money-making exercise to a huge extent. And it becomes depersonalized also.
mm,
But the other fact that happens, as you can imagine, if you do anything that you love and you apply enough pressure, you're going to, and you don't have enough time and space to self-care,
mm,
right? You are going to feel overwhelmed, you are going to feel stressed out, and you are going to eventually probably feel dismissive of the stories that you've heard at least 10,000
mm,
times before, right? So, and that kind of to you might seem minor, but to that person in front of you is actually, it's the first time that they've heard that thing,
yeah.
or it's the first time that they've been exposed to news that they weren't expecting. So,
Mm,
it's important to remember, and I think that this applies to any area of life.
mm,
It might be dealing with one's child, or it might be dealing with, a family member, a relative, or a partner, or, somebody at work. The reality is that we have a view of the world and we have a model of the world in which we apply
mm.
our beliefs,
Yes.
right? And the way in which that comes out is
Yes.
always going to be determined predominantly by how we feel in the moment.
Mm,
If we're feeling stressed, if we're feeling overwhelmed, if we're feeling overstretched,
mhm.
guess what? Are you going to be at your best? Are you going to be, the kind, empathetic, loving person that you would be if you were filling your own cup first, if you were
Mm,
taking care of your sleep, if you were feeling, balanced and
yeah.
as able to cope as you ordinarily, could be if you
Mm,
worked on that? Probably not. And so what happens is that for a lot of times, it's where we focus that determines how we respond. And certainly in a healing,
mm.
I guess, arena, that also applies. So we also have to remember that, yes, doctors are also human,
Yeah.
right? And, we're all humans and we're trying to figure out and navigate these really challenging experiences. I think the biggest key aspect, and that's why I go back to the structure in which we kind of, that we have developed and that we continue to work in, that is an inhumane structure.
Yes.
Right? The healthcare system in its own right. I mean, when you're expecting doctors to work, 20 hours a day and sit back to back patients in a hospital environment, and they're incentivized, for example, in terms of IVF, they're incentivized and paid per cycle they conduct, right? As opposed to it being something that, like if you're paid per baby, guess what? All of a sudden you're going to care a whole lot more about how that person transitions to treatment toward the outcome that they want, because you don't get paid unless they get a baby. Incidentally, in our clinic, that's pretty much how it works. We have a money back guarantee for that very reason. Our patients, our outcome for our patients is a baby. And so when the healthcare system is structured the way that it is, then it becomes a situation that where you focus and how you focus is going to determine the experience of the patient. Right. So that's something that I think, from my perspective, I'm doing a Doctor of Public Health at Harvard right now, and structural healthcare system issues is a big part of the conversations that we have in the day to day. And from my perspective, the way that I see it is that certainly there are many better ways of doing healthcare system structuring, but there is a huge embedded bias of the status quo in preventing it from being done, right? Because what happens is that as ordinarily, what are we? We're focused on making sure that and maintaining order, right? So because we want to maintain order, guess what? We kind of tend to go with the thing that we think is going to maintain that order. And the status quo truly is the biggest enemy of innovation and improvements.
Definitely.
When it comes to healthcare,
that feeling of
and
comfort as well. We need to be uncomfortable to grow.
Oh, and how many people really go for that? Not me.
I feel like we're crossing into the multiverse, because I have another podcast called Growing Revenue and Profit, and we deal with all this organizational stuff, and that whole component of feeling uncomfortable and growing is a big part of that. And what you're talking about, that connection with people, I love that you're talking about the connection with people and creating that I learned too late in life that people remember how you make them feel, not necessarily what you've said. And I love how your organization seems to be focused around that, looking at, doing the research into the background. And you, as you said, that is the driver from that experience that you had very early on in the piece. How much of that, if we link that to what people are experiencing when we're talking about fertility and we're talking about stress, how much of that affects their ability to conceive? When we look at that, we're all stressed about let's have a baby. Does that affect how people go about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is categorically, and not in a good way. The questions I get asked very frequently is, does stress affect infertility or fertility and the chances of taking home a healthy baby? And the answer is maybe. Really. It's maybe. And here's why it's maybe. Because stressing about stressing is certainly not going to give you a baby.
Yeah.
And there are lots of people, if you think about it, in dire situations that still get pregnant and have babies. Think war zones, think, historical events over time. The truth is that stressing about not having a baby, or stressing about stressing, as I like to say it to my patients, is not useful. Right? It's not helpful. It's much more beneficial to focus on how you want to feel instead.
Yes.
Okay? In saying that, there are really important considerations when it comes to this conversation, because often when we're talking about infertility, people think that they are looking for one big reason as to why they're not infertile, or as to why they're not conceiving or having a healthy. Typically, they're looking for a major thing that, and there is the dichotomy in this, because, although it's never going to be one big thing, The fact is that multiple little things usually create one big outcome.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I often talk about this fact that, like if we think about it, that whatever the result that you are dealing with right now, for example, inability to conceive, inability to keep a healthy pregnancy to term, failed IVF treatment, these are outcomes. These are end results of multiple biochemical chain reactions that start all the way over here.
Yeah.
So understanding what are the minor factors or the obstacles along those biochemical pathways that is leading to this result is absolutely critical for helping us to understand how do we change it. Because every system is specifically designed to deliver the result that it's delivering right now. So whether it is inability to conceive, inability to keep a pregnancy to term, fibroids, endometriosis, whatever it is, right? Polycystic ovarian syndrome, which, is the old polycystic ovarian disease. It is now called a syndrome, not a disease. It was then as well,
everything
but this
now.
exactly. That's right. Back then it was as well, but this doctor, like I said,
I'm overly thin for my height, so.
Yeah, so there's all sorts of syndromes, but those are outcomes. Whenever you have an end result, you have an outcome of multiple things that have led to that outcome. And if we look in that process of every system is designed to deliver the outcome that it's currently delivering, then we need to figure out, okay, if this is the design of the system, what are the issues? What are the levers? What are the places of opportunity? Where are the gaps that we can influence in order to be able to get a different outcome? Okay, that's going to be critical. So when people say, does stress cause infertility or miscarriage? The reason that I say maybe is because, sure, it might be a component of those biochemical pathways, but is it the only thing? No, it's not. It never is. There's never one reason. In my book, Fertility Breakthrough, which incidentally is free for people to listen on Spotify, it's called Fertility Breakthrough, Overcoming Infertility and Miscarriage When Other Treatments Have Failed. I've listed in there 9 category reasons for miscarriage because people often think that, it's a numbers game, like infertility. It's not. It's never a numbers game. In fact, when we understand the root cause of what is happening and those multiple obstacles to optimum fertility and an optimal outcome, then that's how we actually start to be able to change the situation and have the result that we are looking for, right? And all of these different places will play some kind of a role and will be different for different people. So, for example, with 10 men, you line up 10 men who have the outcome of low sperm count. Okay, and sure, they might all have the same diagnosis, but the reason as to why they have low sperm count may be completely different in every single one of those 10 men.
Yeah.
Some might have a job that makes them sit on an engine for the whole day, which heats up the testicles. Others have, a job that makes them go out and have too many drinks. Others have, so basically
makes
them choose that option.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is that there could be multiple different things even within each one of those, right? So some might have nutritional deficiencies that arise because of poor diet quality. Others might, so there's many different reasons as to why that low sperm count could be happening. Genetic factors. Somebody might have an MTHFR mutation, which basically makes them, have different nutritional imbalances that lead to the outcome that we're talking about. So can you see there are multiple factors that are causing that result and that outcome? And unless we've figured out, like if we're going to give the same recommendation to every single man, guess what? You're going to end up with lackluster results at best.
Yeah.
Right? And that's one of the reasons as to why sometimes IVF, which has, a 30% or let's say at best 35 to 40% of pregnancy in any cycle, happens to be so low because it's one protocol that we're trying to say that one way of going about doing things is going to deal with every single person who's having that challenge. And the truth is there is nothing that can do that. It's about really figuring out and understanding what are the minor factors. And when it comes to minor factors, this is something that's really important for people to know. At peak fertility, a couple at peak fertility will have on average 3 months time to pregnancy. So literally it's have sex, get pregnant, have a baby, done. We're no longer having this conversation.
Yeah.
When we're still having this conversation, we really need to ask better questions and deeper questions, because what is happening there is that those minor factors that I was talking about, they're getting in the way. And what we know from epidemiological research around the globe, population studies, right, large data, what we know is that if we basically take one minor factor, let's call that minor factor poor sperm count, all of a sudden we go from an average of 3 months time to pregnancy to an average of 2 years. Just by adding that one aspect.
Yeah.
We add a second and we go from 2 to 7 years. And a third gives us an average of 40 years time to pregnancy. No one has 40 years to get pregnant, right? No matter how early they start. And so what happens is that those minor factors, and it might be, for example, poor sperm count, we add polycystic ovarian syndrome, we add a nutritional deficiency, we add whatever it may be. And when I'm treating patients, typically we are project managing, I call it, multiple, sometimes hundreds of minor factors at the same time. So it's not so much about, when it comes to inability to conceive and keep a pregnancy to term, it's not even so much in my role how many minor factors there are. It's about understanding what are the 20% of minor factors that if we address those, we will get 80% of our results.
Yeah.
It's really about figuring out what are the critical pieces, what are the causative minor factors up here on that biochemical chain reaction, and what are the ones that are a result of what's happening over here, and how do we address all of that as a continuum in the best possible way to get the different outcome that we're looking for.
I love that. There's a lot there to unpack, and I love that you touched on the component of the, because there seems to be a perception out there that focus on the female biological clock, but there's also the male component of that. But before we get into that, can we talk a little bit about the mental health component as well? When you're looking at that in the world, and we have a very social media world where we're looking at what everybody else is doing and checking all that out. And for example, I have a friend, him and the partner he's currently with, they seem to be rabbits. He's got 4 children to 3 different women. She's got a number of children as well. And you look at someone like that, and if you're not conceiving, how does someone address the mental health side of things, of staying focused on, these circumstances are different, and staying positive and upbeat?
That's such a great question. I call it the heroin addict syndrome. I had a patient once in my clinic come to me, and she was literally in tears. She was just beside herself, and she blurted out in this moment, if I start shooting up heroin, maybe then I'll get a baby. And I'm like,
oh, wow.
Okay, that's unexpected. It took me a moment to go, oh, how am I going to address this with this person? And then I realized what it is that it came down to, but really what we're dealing with, I want to talk about the physical component first, and then I'll talk about the emotional. What we're dealing with there is epigenetics, right? We all know that there are people, we all have heard of people who have never smoked a day in their life and died of lung cancer. And people who are chain smokers, like I have one of these uncles who is literally a chain smoker. He will smoke 4 packs of cigarette a day. He's 70-something. He's fit as a fiddle. And you just go, how is that possible?
That's my mum.
Honestly, I just feel like that's abnormal. That is impossible. But that, he probably will die of a heart attack, in a moment one of these days. But he is in otherwise good health. And I just go I don't know how. If I smoked 1 cigarette, I probably would die right now on this floor. But the reality of it is that different people have different predispositions. Some people, they are predisposed to lung conditions. Other people are predisposed to gut conditions. Other people are predisposed to nervous system conditions. Whatever, that predisposition is going to be, the trigger in the environment, no matter what it is going to trigger that, right? So you can have the same exposure, i.e. cigarette smoking, on one person who will die of lung cancer and the other who will not.
Mm-hmm.
They will have other problems, but that's not it. In fertility, it's the same thing. Whatever the exposures are, and exposure is anything that you are in contact with in your day-to-day. It might be diet, it might be toxins, it might be a certain type of lifestyle, it might be exercise, it might be, whatever, you name it. Whatever the exposure that you are, confronted with in a day-to-day, it will either have a positive or a negative effect when it comes to one's fertility. Because there is no neutral exposure when it comes to a couple who is experiencing reproductive challenges. Why is that? Because anything that's neutral is not adding to the chances of conceiving and taking home a healthy baby. Therefore, it becomes a detractor. If you look at the Net Promoter Score, anything that's not an 8 or above becomes a detractor, right?
Yes.
Similar situation here. It's really about looking at, what are the exposures that are beneficial? How do we enhance those? How do we remove or lessen the impact of the negative ones or neutral ones? Because they're just weight, right, that we don't want to have to carry unnecessarily. So that's the first thing. It's understanding that your body will respond differently to somebody else's and somebody else's again. That's the physical component, right? The emotional component is what I call swimming in your lane. Like just literally swim in your lane. Like there is no point looking to the side, seeing what this person's doing, what that person's doing, what that person has, what that person doesn't have. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant to your results. What else is going on out there in the world? The only thing that's relevant to your results is you and what it is that you're doing and how you are perceiving what it is that you're doing in your day-to-day. Therefore, stop.
It isn't that easy. I mean, in this world, because
the thing
I turned my phone off. It lives on silent about 8 years ago, and emails, everything's off, so I don't get that distraction. But I've told that story many times, and very few people can do it. Is it?
Well, actually, I disagree. I disagree. Very few people have trained themselves to do it.
Yeah, well, that's probably the better way of putting it. When I say can do it, we all can do it. You're right.
That's right. Everybody can do it. It's a matter of, I love the way that Joe Dispenza talks about meditation.
Yeah.
And, what he says is that what you want to do is you want to break that horse, right? You want to train your animal, which is your body, to sit there for an hour. Right? I remember when I started to learn to meditate, I think it was around 2007, 2008. And, I did a Vedic meditation course, which is like the transcendental meditation. And I remember before that time thinking, oh my God, there is absolutely no way in the world I'm just not a meditating person, right? Like I'm type A as it comes. I've got 2 Harvard degrees, or they're almost,
I'm astounded by all the degrees and work that when I did my research. It's like, I'm exhausted just looking at what you've done.
Seriously, I've got more degrees than I need. And, and I'm very, very, very type A. It's like set a goal, achieve it. That's just how it is for me, or has been for a very long time. So you can imagine that, meditation wasn't a natural thing that just came to me one day going, I'm just going to sit here and meditate, I was actually doing it because I wanted to help my husband not die of a heart attack. Because he had major insomnia. And I said, listen, you've got to do something about this, which is to control your mind. And, this is going to be a good way. So I'll go with you. So
you went type A and said, this is what you're going to do.
That's exactly right. I was like, okay, this is what we're doing, right? And so we did. And it's still one of the best things that I have ever done. And it did help him sleep from the very first night that the very first day he meditated, he was like able to sleep. Which incidentally, it's a really interesting thing, people say to me, all the time. It's like, how do you sleep so well? I have always slept so well. But the reason is that I literally will take whatever is going on in my life. It can be anything. It can be the most distressing, stressful, crazy, whatever, right? When it comes to sleep, it's sacred to me. And so basically, I will literally, it's like a switch. I will turn off the switch. It's like, you know what? Nothing else matters right now. I'm sleeping. Good night.
I love it. That's awesome.
And within 2 minutes, I am asleep. And I'll sleep for 8 hours without waking up and all of those things. But going back to the question, which is, you know, can people do this? Like I was saying, I never set out to be a meditator. Right? It really was not in my makeup, I didn't think. But the more I practiced it, the more I was able to just get into that routine, right? And I made it into a practice. I made it into something that actually I was able to do. And even though with Vedic meditation, you do 20 minutes twice a day. And last year, and then I went for a couple of years without actually doing a lot of meditation at all. And then last year, when I got into my doctoral program, I thought, you know what, I better bring that back as a practice, because there was a lot of things going on, and I thought I better bring it back as a practice. And I gave myself the gift, honestly, of just being in the moment for 20 minutes each day. It wasn't even my usual prescription, but I was like, you know, I'm just going to do this for 20 minutes each day.
Yeah.
And there is such an incredible thing that happens when you just tell yourself, no matter what happens, no matter what else it is that you need to accomplish, you're just going to let that go.
Yeah.
For 20 minutes. And just forget whatever it is, just let it go. And open that space. It's amazing. I feel like when I do that, I'm so much more creative, so much more able. And then it gives me also the knowledge that if I can do that, there's many other things that I can do as well. Yeah. Right? And this is my thing about how Joe Dispenza talks about this, which is, you know, and for a couple of years ago, I actually decided to do the You Are the Placebo meditation, which is an hour meditation. And it's really easy for people to say, oh, I don't have that time. Well, guess what? I get up sometimes at 4 a.m. to be able to fit it in, right? But I get so much out of that and so much out of that process that is a gift to me and to my mental health and to my ability to be in the world and to do the things that I need to do, that I consider it a necessity. I consider it an absolute investment in my ability to show up for myself and others, right?
What you're talking about there, though, is the woodcutter sharpening their axe.
Always, right? If
you always cut more.
That's right. And doesn't the Dharma says, if you have no time to meditate, that's when you need to meditate double?
Exactly.
Right? So, you know, and for me, none of this is like, I don't do it out of, you know, it's not out of a desire for improvement. It's not that. It's not for a desire of, you know, that I need to ascend. You know, it is not that at all. It is literally just a gift to myself. That's how I look at it. And you see, because that's how I look at it, I actually look forward to it.
Yeah.
I find that, okay, wow, I'm so excited. I'm gonna actually take this moment, this time, whatever it's gonna be, whether it's gonna be 20 minutes or an hour, I'm gonna just be with myself, in myself. And it is such a wonderful, wonderful thing when you change those thoughts, which make up the beliefs that then drive you to do things. If I was doing it from a place of, oh no, you know, I'm doing this because I need to better myself, because this is about, you know, what, I know that I wouldn't be excited about it. I wouldn't be joyful about it. I wouldn't be enjoying it as I do because of the thought that I chose to link with it. So when it comes to the question that you originally asked, which is, you know, how can people, when they're going through these challenges, infertility, miscarriage, whatever life is throwing at them, you know, how do we deal with those things in a way that actually is life-giving.
Mm.
And that is by the relationship that you build with yourself.
Yeah.
One of the things that I see so often is people, when they're going through challenges, whether their body is not responding the way that they would like it to, or, whatever's going on, people tell themselves the nastiest things,
That's what I was going to say from that perspective. When you're talking about a couple that are wanting to have a baby, then they're feeling that stress of not having a baby. And from looking at the work that you do, you're very focused on that mental health component as well, and the bringing together of the relationship, if I'm understanding correctly, because that could cause a lot of stress and cause relationships to break up if it's not managed.
100%, 100%. And the managing begins with managing self. Because, a lot of the time, so often, I get couples and the guy is feeling nagged, the woman's feeling like a nag, and it's this real kind of lock of horns and really uncomfortable situation. And the first thing that I say to my patients is, it is not your job to nag, and it is not your job to allow it to happen. Right? Because what happens is this, and how do you not allow somebody to nag you? Well, you reach agreements and you keep them.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's one of the biggest things that people don't do in relationships. They have high expectations that they don't even verbalize. And then when the partner is suddenly acting in a way that goes against the expectations that aren't actually voiced, they react. Right? So the best way to prevent that from the very beginning is to say, okay, this is what I am thinking. This is what I am thinking. Now, how can we bridge that? Can we agree on certain components here? And what can you commit to? What can I commit to? Do we agree to those commitments? Great. Because then guess what? All of a sudden, when you actually have verbalized what it is that you want, what it is that you need, your partner has heard you. They verbalize what it is that they want, what it is that they need.
Yeah.
And then you have the conversation of, okay, based on these things, what can we actually agree on here together, right? And then this person will say, look, I can agree and commit to this. Great. I can agree and commit to this.
Yeah.
All right. Do we agree that that's what we're committing to? Yes. So when there is a breach in those agreements, don't say anything.
Yeah.
Because
how does that work? I mean, from that perspective, because we look at, what I've seen, one of the examples was, okay, the clock is ticked in, I'm ovulating now, let's have sex. To me, that just seems so unromantic, and maybe I'm old romantic, but it doesn't, it seems to be in a formulaic approach. Does that work as well, having those formulas, or does there need to be a bit of flow there?
It's interesting because I love this saying. A problem is a problem when you think it's a problem.
Yeah, I love that.
Okay? So the reality is that for a particular couple, that might be the perfect way of approaching it.
Yeah.
For another couple, that is not the perfect way of approaching it.
Scheduling in sex at this time.
For one person in the relationship, exactly.
Yeah.
For one person in the relationship, that's not the appropriate way. For the other, it is.
Yeah.
Then is when we need to figure out those agreements. Because it might very well be, like, I'll be honest, when I wanted to get pregnant and have a baby, I was literally like, okay, it's time now, right now. Like, literally, right now.
Bar up, come on.
Let's go. So, the thing is, that's not how I go about it, but it's like, there was an objective. And many people get focused on it like that. Now, the problem with it is when that persists over a long period.
Yeah.
Right?
And you're not getting results.
And so what happens is that then there is a disconnection. So sex cannot be only for reproduction.
Yes.
And I think that that's one of the really important things that couples need to understand is that when they're trying to conceive, when they're having difficulty, yes, there will be that 1 or 2 conception attempts in the cycle that it's like, right now. Right? And sometimes, because what ends up happening for some men is that they feel really pressured, and then of course they have erectile dysfunction, and then nothing happens, right? And so some women may need to go, differently and approach that situation differently.
Well, there's ways that can make that happen sooner if you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's
Yeah.
the thing. And that's why these conversations are so vital.
So I'm saying right now, there's certain actions you can do which will that encourage that.
Right now. Exactly. But this is the thing. But for some men, they feel, because you see what happens for a lot of men who in a partnership deal with infertility, because I always say fertility is a team sport. You know, it's never going to be a one-sided situation. So there are men who develop a certain way of looking at the situation that goes something like this, and it's because of the conversations within themselves. I'm not succeeding at making this woman pregnant, the woman that I love, and, making our dreams come true in terms of having a baby. Therefore, this becomes a dangerous situation. Therefore, I better not have an erection, because then I can't fail.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like, well, this is not working. So, it's not because we couldn't actually get pregnant.
I understand it. I just don't relate to that.
No, totally.
I understand
Totally. So the thing about it is that, again, it's the stories we choose to tell ourselves that will dictate what kinds of outcomes and what kinds of emotional scenarios and stressful scenarios we may or may not experience. Right? So I think that really what's important is when somebody is stuck in these so-called problems, because remember what I said, a problem is a problem only if you think it's a problem. It might be totally fine for a man to get an erection with through masturbation, about to orgasm and get into the vagina, and that's it, it's done. For some people. For other people, no, they need the whole ritual, the whole romantic thing, and the whole, which there's no right or wrong.
Correct,
it's just knowing yourself, what it is that you need, how you need it, understanding, having conversations, making agreements. And it might be that, a partner might ask the other, look, I need you to do these things in this way, and then I'll be ready, or I'll be more willing, or whatever it is, right? So I think that the key aspect is, one, to understand what it is that you want as an individual, and then to be able to communicate that effectively without blame, without justification, just saying, look, this is essentially what I would like, and this is what I need. How can we get close to that? How can we get to that? What's the way that we can approach the situation?
That whole component, and that comes down to communication. And don't you love it when you get to an age and you're quoting your parents and liking it? And my mum used to always talk about communication is a key to any relationship. From that as well, with pregnancy and how that happens, how has society changed and added pressure to that? And to put it in context, I have friends around the world, a number of them, where they got together with their partner and got married while still in university. And a lot of people were saying, what are you doing? You don't even know who you are yet. And they got together. They've had 3 or 4 children at least in these people that I'm referring to. And there's a bunch of them that have done that. They've grown together, as they put it. So they've actually grown together, have very strong relationships, and now that the children are a little bit older, they've actually gone out and started their own businesses together. So they're working together, creating, and this is quite common from a number of people that I've spoken to. Yet on the other side of things, people in society, it seems that it's about, for both men and women, focus on your career. Don't worry about a relationship. You can do that later. How has that affected the ability for people to have children?
Look, here's the thing. Fertility is a very archaic event in this world, right? We are now at the point where we're living easily with reasonable quality of life well into our 80s, 90s, and even up to 100. There's some research that basically discusses the fact that in the next 10 years, because of the medical scientific innovations that are around right now, that we're probably going to extend lifespans for another decade or 2
Yeah,
in
I'm
the
aiming for
next 10
150 right
years.
now. I'm aiming for 150. That's my goal.
I honestly don't know that I want to live that long, but that's another story.
There's so much to experience, though. I'm looking at it, the more you know, you go, oh wow, there's a.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
But I'm still ambivalent. You know, I'll see how we go before I make that decision or that proclamation. But the thing about it is this: is that lifespans have increased, fertility spans have not. Okay, and really, you know, I keep track of these things, and I can't really see any major change with what's going on, even with stem cell research in terms of ovarian rejuvenation. It's still really not even close to what I would call there, right? So I don't think that we're going to see anytime soon. And, you know, this is a prediction. We'll see in another 20 years once we listen to this podcast episode whether I was right or
I'll put it in
wrong.
a time capsule.
That's it, exactly.
Get back with the DeLorean. Get it.
That's right, exactly. But, you know, I would really say that we're still about 20 to 30, probably more years from being able to, in any substance, extend fertility potential with one's own eggs. Now, with donor egg, already we are there. You know, you can have an 80-year-old who's in good health have a baby. Like there was I think the oldest woman so far was 78 or something like that.
Oh, wow.
We've had in our own clinic, we've had a 61-year-old have a baby, you know, with donor egg. So the reality of it is that from that perspective, it's there. From a woman's own egg, it's not quite there yet. And so this very much comes down to people's beliefs. Some people are very adamant that they will only try to have a baby if it's via natural conception. Others are willing to do IUI, intrauterine insemination. Others are willing to do IVF. Others are willing to do donor egg. Others are willing to do embryo, donor embryo. Others are willing to do, you know, surrogacy, whatever it takes, right? And so I think the level of comfort and the level of one's beliefs dictates to a great degree how far a couple will go up the intervention scale.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And from that perspective, it will determine when do we focus on what. Because, you know, the reality of it is that it's quite reasonable for a woman to want to have her first child in her mid-40s, you know, essentially from the perspective of having done her career, having been financially secure, you know, doing all of the things that essentially she wants to do, travel and, you know, all of those things. But biologically speaking, that's not possible. You know, unless, of course, you use other types of interventions.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's the limiting factor. You know, the
Is
reality
part of that
is
limiting factor too also this expectation of what it's going to be like? Because again, I look at the people that had the children younger, and they when they describe their life, there's no missing out that they had. They still traveled, and I know from my perspective, when my son was 4 months old, we took him to Switzerland. It was fine. There was no problem doing that, and didn't cry on the plane too. So I was lucky there.
Yeah. So see, here's the thing. My grandmother had her first child at 14, age 14.
Yeah.
Right? That's my grandmother.
Yeah.
Like
that's not that long ago.
Not really. I mean,
Yeah.
2 generations ago.
Yeah.
Right? My mom had me at 21. Right? So she had been married for 3 years, which again, who's married for 3 years at 21 these days? Not very many people. Right? And she had me at 21 and accidentally. I will add.
Tripped over. Oops. They were both walking around naked. Someone tripped over and it's like, oh, accident.
Accidentally. No, actually, this is quite funny. My parents are from Brazil, and that's actually incidentally where I was born and raised for part of my life. And And in Brazil, if you actually research in the 70s, there was a major oral contraceptive pill recall because they essentially were sugar pills. There was a major debacle.
No.
Yeah, there was a class action on this and everything. And actually, I was one of the things.
Ah, wow.
So,
congratulations.
well, exactly. Congratulations, and lucky for my mom that she decided to keep me, right?
Yeah.
But the reality of it is that it's like, I talk to my parents now, and my parents are in, my mom is 60, how old is she? 63, 4? I think she's 63 or so. And no, she's 64. And my dad is 72. Yeah. And the thing about it is that, they feel like they've lived quite amazing lives.
Yeah.
And so they don't feel like they've missed out on anything. Of course, there were things that were challenging, like when I was growing up, my mum was doing postgraduate education, my dad was changing careers and doing a degree, and then, he did other further studies and so on and so forth. So I think that there is the usual, things that people will do, whether they have kids or not. It's just the fact that if you do have kids earlier, there are things will be slower. And that's one of the things when there is the gender gap conversation around, women leaving the workforce. The reality of it is that it interrupts their career for that period of time in which they're raising children, but it doesn't stop them from progressing and eventually achieving pretty much a similar outcome with male counterparts. And these days as well, men and women are sharing those responsibilities. There is paternity leave in some countries, and there is the opportunity to take extended leave when a child is born for both men and women. So, I think that it's about a life design question more than a fertility question of when should you do what things that you want. Obviously, we need to have the biological imperative firmly in mind that for a woman, her peak reproductive years are going to be from, 14 to 30-something, right? And early 40s. Of course, it's still possible to conceive. I mean, we still get great results for patients at 42, 43, but, with their own eggs. But the reality is that it then becomes more work, and when people say about the cost of fertility treatment, well, actually, that's just like the cost of having a baby just a little bit before the baby comes.
Yeah.
Because, as you know, a child is not cheap, right? and I often say, people
especially if you send them to private school.
Well, exactly. Precisely. I'm not having a heart attack. So the thing about it is that, when it comes to that ability to have babies, and to live your life and design your life in the way that you want, it's really about that. I think that, for couples, the biggest thing is actually asking yourself what it is that you want, right? And how do you want it? Yeah. Because if you're adamant that you want to have a baby, then obviously don't leave it to the last minute. Don't leave it to, much later in life, because you will need to figure out, and mind you, these days there are other options. If you're married and you want to, that you want to have babies much later, well, perhaps freezing embryos is a good option. Freezing eggs is not a good option because still egg freezing is very ineffective. You will go through the procedure, you'll freeze eggs, most of them won't thaw out. Most of them will not fertilize, and the vast majority of those will not actually yield a baby.
Oh, wow.
So,
didn't know that.
So the technology of egg freezing is still really, kind of like back there in the dark ages. But if look, there are challenges in terms of freezing embryos, because if you then decide that you don't want to be with that partner anymore, most likely you'll need to. No, look, we've had many of these issues where people froze embryos together, broke up the relationship. The woman wants to use the embryos, the man is like, absolutely not. Then it's a custody battle before the child is even born.
Wow.
There are many challenges in terms of that as well. I mean, the other options, of course, are donor egg, donor embryo, donor sperm. Those are all options. Obviously, again, it's how comfortable are people to go up that line of intervention.
And what about the component? Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say also one very important thing to realize is that none of those things is a sure bet, right? IVF treatment is not a magic bullet, and donor egg is not a magic bullet. You know, in our clinic we see close to 98% plus success with donor egg cycles, but in the general population it's 47.5%.
Wow.
So just because you're going to go and do a donor egg cycle doesn't mean that it's absolutely necessarily going to work. So you do need to put those, you know, pave the way, so to speak, you know, understand those biochemical pathways that I was talking about before, and really optimize all of those things, especially when there has been long-standing infertility, perhaps a history of miscarriage or failed IVF treatments. It's essential if we want to change the outcome that we're seeing.
Yeah. And from that, you mentioned about work as well. I have a friend of mine, she had a baby when she was young, and then 18 years later with her new partner had a baby. And she said, oh my God, it was so much harder because the recovery wasn't there. Is that, you know, how do we manage that as well?
You know, it's funny because I think that just a second pregnancy full stop is so much harder. You know, like I had 2 children. I have 2 boys, and this year they're gonna be 11 and 8. And I tell you, the first pregnancy, it was like nothing, except for the fact that I literally was crawling on the floor because I was so tired. Every moment of the day, all I wanted to do was sleep, and I was working full time, still running my practice. So, but I would come home at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I would find myself on the couch, and I would not get up until 5 o'clock the next morning when I had to go back to work. So I was extremely fatigued, but I felt great. Second time around, and you think, you know, like with a second child, you're going to have like economy of scale, you know, you've got all you already know what to expect, you know what it is that you're in for. No, it's double the work. And honestly, my body, and I had them 3 years apart, and already I was like, oh my God, this is too much. So second pregnancies are just in general not that easy in my experience. Of course, not every woman thinks this way because there are some who have 20 children, right? So that is another factor. But there are ways in which, you know, we can optimize and improve the experience, that's for sure. And that preparation certainly helps. But it's a function of the fact that you're growing a human.
Yes, exactly.
You're growing a human. It's hard work.
Yeah, I can't, and obviously, I mean, I can read all the books I want on it, but I can never understand that fully because I can't have that experience. And that's why I'm curious to hear that story, and thank you for sharing that. I know we're running short of time. If we can sum it up, what would be the key takeaways that you would want give to couples that are wanting to have children? What are things that they should consider, you know, from the broad gamut of areas that you cover, from having sex to, you know, mental health? What would you want the audience to take away?
No, you were saying about the experience, that you'll never be able to have the experience, so you wanted to ask about it.
Yeah, or from that,
Fair enough.
Yeah, no, from that, I could never have that experience of having a baby, so I can't. So I appreciate that you were sharing that story. And from that side of things, I was asking you, because I know we're running out of time. We've gone a little bit over time, actually. But if you were to leave the audience with something that they could take away, you know, in respect of their fertility, what they should do, some nutshell key wisdoms, what would you want them to take away?
There is one thing, and that is to act pregnant now to get pregnant later. And, you know, that really does apply to both prospective parents. And really what it entails and what it comes down to is, think about it. If you were to be pregnant right now, and I know that, you know, as you said, you will never really have that experience, but imagine for a moment, you know, like what would it be like if I was able to be pregnant right now? If I was inside myself holding that little baby that I want to create, you know, out into the world. What are the things that I would absolutely start doing or stop doing to make sure that I had the best possible starting life for my child? Really, that is everything that you want to start doing or stop doing right now. Because right now, whether you're a woman or a man, you are currently holding 50% of that little baby that you want to create inside you right now. So all of the things that you could do to optimize your health, your biochemistry, your mental health, all of those things are going to benefit that 50%, and certainly will benefit you and the quality of life that you have in the future, and certainly the quality of life of your child in the future. You know, what was really interesting, there was a couple of meta-analyses that were published this year about looking at the fact that when a person is diagnosed with infertility, that there is an increased risk of all-cause mortality, even if they have a baby. So what does that mean? It basically means, in a nutshell, is that if you bypass the reasons as to why infertility is happening, it's very likely that your quality of life and life is going to suffer in the future. That's why when it comes to overcoming infertility and miscarriage, I really want to get to the bottom of what are the root cause, what is the underlying issue that is causing this outcome, so that we can address it and change it to enhance a person's long-term quality of life and health into the future. Because I know my patients, they don't just want to have a baby. They want to be around to raise that child, right? And in order to do that, we need to make sure that we are in the best possible state of health before and after. And that's what this process is all about. So acting pregnant now to get pregnant later will certainly get you many, many steps along that path.
Yeah, I love that. That's great advice. And from that perspective as well, I mean, just so people can reach, you mentioned the book that you've got. You'll have all the details in the show notes, but what are the key ways that you'd like people to reach out to you and contact you?
Yeah, absolutely. We offer a complimentary fertility assessment for anyone who may be interested in understanding more about how our process, which has a 78.8% live birth rate, can help them overcome infertility and miscarriage, even when other treatments have failed. So they will just need to go onto the link, go to the website, fertilitybreakthrough.com. The link will be on the show notes, and we can have a conversation.
I love that. Gabriela, thank you so much for taking time on the show. I could have talked for a lot longer. Maybe we'll do a part 2 or something like that, because there's so much here to unpack that would help people. But I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show.
Sounds great. It's such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being part of the Share.Care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.